Kusin yohatuasak, Lukahadi ayahad, Kagwantanyeri, Yehidak. Honorable Tribal Hosts, Executive Vice Presidents, Honorable Delegates, and Tribal Citizens. It is always so good to be home. It's been a few crazy months in Washington, D.C., lots of big wins, lots of work left to do, but when I'm back here, I can actually take a breath and enjoy my family and to be able to stop and to remember all the reasons why we do the work that we do in Washington, D.C. Our theme this week, Dukik Wush Gaik Shat, means it's a really important theme to me. It's the kind of theme that keeps me going. And I thought yesterday as we were sitting around working on our resolutions that the issues are the same across the country. There are many different stories, but it's about protecting our way of life, recognizing our governance, and our inherent rights. Just think the strength that we have, we hold each other up. Tribes across the country, just as well as here at home. The news is always talking about the partisan situation in Washington, D.C., and this 113th Congress has already passed two important bills that affirm and advance tribal sovereignty. The Stafford Act, that allows tribes to access resources to deal with natural resources, and the Violence Against Women Reauthorization, that enhances the ability of tribes to protect their citizens and secure our communities. We won these victories because we held each other up. Violence against women was the first time Indian country led a national legislative strategy. Hundreds of tribal leaders and other partners stood with us on these issues that matter to our communities. We engaged with members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, who understand the importance of our nation-to-nation relationship. And then we worked with senior administration officials who were committed to building a more prosperous future for our tribal nations in the United States. They were both big wins for tribes, but the result was less certain for Alaska. We will continue to fight for the recognition of tribal jurisdiction and lands, and we need to put them forward as a campaign issues in our upcoming elections here in Alaska. I know it's already 2013, but I do want to take a moment just to celebrate our victories from 2012 elections. Alaska in general, and Tlingit and Haida in particular, led the way as part of the NCAI's national effort to turn out the largest Native vote effort in history. We had events across the country, including an event right here in the Elizabeth Peradovich Hall. Melissa Kukash and Nicole Hollingstad's leadership in Southeast Alaska brought so much promise that they're now going to head the statewide Native vote efforts in 2012. Redistricting hurt us in 2012, and with the voter ID bill moving in the legislature, we need to be prepared. NCAI is working to ensure that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act continues to apply in Alaska. We need to work together to protect our voting rights and ensure our vote is heard. Let me say a few more things about the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization. After many years of tireless effort, the Senate supported the legislation with 78 votes to 22, and then it went to the House with a vote of 286 to 138. The legislation marks a significant victory for tribal nations for the NCAI Violence Against Women Task Force. The new Violence Against Women Act is a great step forward, but we know it does not solve every problem. NCAI's work on this issue will not be finished until every Native woman is safe and strong in her surroundings, no matter where she lives, including here in Alaska. In the months to come, we have many opportunities to work together. I encourage everyone who cares about fighting against violence for our Native women, get involved with the work of the NCAI Task Force. They continue to fight for Alaska provisions and as they implement the Act. But as I said earlier, these were great wins in Congress. And we've learned a couple of things about those wins, and some of them can be helpful as you face the challenges that you have here in Alaska. First, be prepared for a long fight. Successes take many, many years. In fact, if you look second, the NCAI resolution that was passed for the Violence Against Women Task Force passed in 2003. It was over 10 years before we were able to get the recognition of jurisdiction that we needed. Third, be prepared to make the case. We would not even have been a part of the national dialogue if we wasn't for two things. One, we had the crime statistics to be able to highlight the challenges we face, and we had the stories of women who were willing to stand up and be heard. We developed other efforts as we need to think clearly and carefully about how we get those data and stories to be able to push our efforts forward. And finally, the most important piece, we were united. When the tribal amendments to the violence against women went under threat, members of the task force, Indian country advocates, and our non-Indian partners stood together for victory. We never seen such united work. I've never seen such united work in Washington, D.C. To achieve such a policy goal, and it was just really amazing. So we need to be able to develop those partnerships outside of Indian country and unite our voices with other areas too. I want to talk about the federal budget. You heard a lot of conversation about the sequester. We had the Bureau of Indian Affairs person here this morning. And let me tell you what the sequester means. It means that the federal agency is dealing with a 5% across-the-board cut. Even worse, because we only have 7 months left of this fiscal year, it's like there's a 10% cut. So we're looking at cuts of $130 million from Interior and over $200 million from the IHS, which cuts key youth programs like Head Start and Impact Aid. And this doesn't end with just the new fiscal year. As you can see from this slide, the impact of sequester will grow in successive years. Standing together to fight the sequester is critical. Whether the sequester is in place or not, we need to realize that there will be ongoing challenges to tribal budgets because of the federal budget deficit. You can see from this slide how challenging the budget looks in the next 10 years. An example of this budget, President Obama released last week. And our staff has done a really quick turnaround. We broadcasted it out within 24 hours, the analysis of that budget. It has seen that in his final offer to this grand bargain to target more spending cuts and increase revenues. Well, we can see some promising signs in the budget with the increased spending for public safety, health, and other areas. The biggest issue in the president's budget is the cap on contract support costs. NCAI has urged Congress to oppose this proposal, require any changes to be implemented after consultation with tribes, and hold oversight hearings on contract support costs. Next week, we are hosting a joint tribal budget briefing to stand together on the Hill with our representatives in Washington, D.C., and to make sure lawmakers know how the sequester is hurting our communities. We need to make sure Congress hears us when we say balancing the budget must be done without diminishing the trust responsibility. Now I'd like to turn my attention to our other top key legislative priorities. Restoring tribal lands is our top priority, whether we're seeking a fix for Carcieri in Congress or working to advance the Sealaska Lands Bill to ensure our tribes can take land into trust. I was so happy to see the federal court decision that the Secretary of Interior has the authority to acquire trust lands for Alaska tribes, and that the current Interior regulations unfairly discriminate against Alaska tribes. Now you know, as you've heard, that this is going to be controversial, and we need to emphasize that land into trust is necessary for us to protect our culture and our lifeways. But you need to be prepared for more litigation. And we need to pay close attention to Congress as they might try to close that loop and protect tribal lands here in Alaska. I also want to say this most important is that Alaska has to be united when they go to Washington, D.C. on the solutions that they propose for implementing this decision. Also on Congress's agenda is the education reauthorization. NCAI worked with regional intertribal organizations and national partners to develop the education bill. We call it the Native Class Act. The act requires that tribes have a strong voice in setting the education policy for your own communities. It keeps intact the programs like Title VII and enhances the language programs in our schools. We need to make sure that you understand these priorities and that you are included in education reauthorization. It's also important to rally behind the reauthorization of the Native American Programs Act, which includes the ANA programs that many of you use, but the Esther Martinez Language Preservation Act. There's been several resolutions this week related to housing, and we all know that there's a great need for housing in Southeast Alaska. Now is the time for Congress to hear your voice as the Senate prepares to consider the NAHASA reauthorization next month. NCAI has formed a task force with National American Indian Housing Council, and we need your recommendations to ensure that the reauthorization includes your priorities. We'll be actually putting forward our priorities by the end of this month. I'd like to turn now to some of the cultural and natural resource issues that are being faced in Washington, D.C. Cultural protections are the heartbeat of Indian country. Nothing rallies Indians more than challenges to our traditional lifeways. So NCAI got a request from Southeast Alaska earlier to assist with finding a solution to the migratory bird feather issue. And I want to tell you that this is a very sensitive issue. Tribes across the country have worked very hard, particularly with the eagle feathers policy decisions that came out at the President's meeting at the end of last year, to protect things like the eagle feathers for ceremonial purposes. But those laws don't allow for feathers to be used for items that are going to be sold. Congressman Young is currently considering introducing a bill that will allow the use of flicker feathers in Alaska Native artifacts intended for sale. This proposal does not include the tribes in the lower 48, but they undoubtedly will view this proposal with mixed reactions. Some would oppose this due to the inherent cultural and sacred beliefs. I would urge you that conversations need to be had with other tribes to find solutions to meet all of our needs. NCAI also strongly supports the efforts to obtain stronger federal protections for Alaska Native subsistence efforts, for hunting and fishing and gathering rights. This is Alaska's top priority, and it's important that the new Secretary of Interior takes on this challenge, and we will do our best to keep that in the forefront. Fishing has also been a very critical economic and subsistence issue in our communities. Just like this morning, I approved a letter that went to Congress requesting a hearing on the Magnuson-Stevens Act that would include tribal leadership from Alaska. The act establishes the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council to oversee the management of this nation's fisheries. And we think it's important that they hear the voice from the Alaska Natives. I want to turn now my attention to the work with the administration. Republican Congressman Cole, who is an enrolled citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, serves in the House, and he had it right when earlier this year, actually when we finished having the violence against women rallies, he said, Obama has been the best president for tribes in the history of the United States. Yay. But we need to remember we have less than 4 years left to make sure that we institute all the critical changes and partnerships that we have developed with this administration for the future administrations. One of those efforts is to make sure that the Affordable Care Act, the health care, is implemented to meet the needs of tribal citizens. And there are challenges around the definition of Indian for the purposes of the exemption from requiring to pay insurance. We are continuing to work with the administration and Congress to apply a technical fix to clarify that those that are eligible for IHS services are also eligible for this exemption. Let me tell you that one of the most important things that you can do for implementation of healthcare reform, you heard earlier this week that the state of Alaska has made a decision not to participate in the exchange program. This expansion, and without expanding the Medicaid coverage, this expansion would not allow Alaska less than 10% of the full cost and nothing for the next 3 years. It offers many resources for the tribal healthcare systems and the state. You need now to act now, to reach out to the governor and to be able to urge him to expand the Medicaid eligibility for our state. Another administrative priority that we know is working, that the president said when he gave his State of the Union address, he said he was going to deal with immigration. Immigration reform is being talked about in Congress right now this week. And as you know, many of us think, well, this is immigration. We don't have much to say, much of an issue in that. But we know, particularly here in Alaska, that we have had trade and travel to our Canadian friends and relatives for a long time. And it's part of our cultural systems, and it's important that our voices are heard on this debate, particularly around those areas. So this week, NCAI, we sent a letter to the White House and to Congress urging them to ensure that tribal governments and businesses are included in that final bill, as it is important to our cultural systems. On Tuesday morning, the Supreme Court heard the Baby Veronica case. This is an important case, and the administration is critical to the successful preparation of this case. We have urged Department of Justice to make sure that the states enforce the Indian Child Welfare Act. And we worked with states across the country. We actually had 19 states sign on to one of the briefs, including the state of Alaska. So we are very pleased that the state of Alaska joined in with one of those briefs. It's always impossible to predict the outcome of a Supreme Court. And even though I was here in Alaska, I was on teleconferences and we were talking, you know, as soon as the case got presented, we were talking about what we thought. But my staff that was there said that they felt that there were some positive signs from even Justice Scalia. So we're crossing our fingers. But we'll have to wait until that decision comes out in June. And whatever the decision is going to be, we have to learn from our lessons of a successful briefing work and our media campaign that we put around this effort. But we need to be prepared for congressional action, because we can anticipate, no matter how this court makes its decision, regardless of the result, someone is going to go to Congress and try to be able to attack the Indian Child Welfare Act. The united effort on the ICWA case reminds me of something that's really important to us. It's the heart of who we are as Native people, our youth. The decisions we make today are clearly going to affect their tomorrow. Here in Alaska, half of our people, 49.5%, are 26 years of age or younger. We really, in fact, this is the highest population curve in any of the other tribal communities across the state, so in the country. So Alaska has the highest percentage of youngest population. Those young people need to have the tools to build strong futures for our community. That's why we created this Indian Spark. And it's, I tell youth that I mentor that this was created because when I tell them the story about Austin Hammond, Chief Donawak, our clan leader, Donawak, and he said to the kid out at the camp that I worked at with him, he said, if you want to be a leader, you've got to prepare like a warrior, and you have to be of strong body and of strong mind. And so your physical well-being is critical to your endurance as a leader. Indian Spark is an online community for Native youth between the ages of 13 and 24 to connect with other Native people around the country, discuss issues, establish new lifestyle patterns. And it's important to support this tool for our youth, and right now there are many youth from our tribe who have signed up. And I want to urge you that to get your kids, your grandkids, and every young person that you know within that age group to sign up for this important opportunity. Last, I wanted to let you know that this is April. April is Financial Literacy Month, and it's important for our communities to strengthen and build our financial skills for our leaders and our citizens. We have a lot of stuff on our website at NCAI about how you can engage in education, financial education campaigns, whether it be at your family, your youth councils. In fact, if you go to Indian Spark, the youth can actually do some curriculum there on financial literacy. And before I close, I want to let you know about our future meetings that are coming up. NCAI gives you a great opportunity to sit down with other tribal leaders, to roll up your sleeves, and to engage on making policy recommendations that we use to help us do our work in Washington, D.C. And in conclusion, I just want to thank you all for the work that you do here to help hold each other up. You are building a strong, healthy future for our children, and I'm glad to stand here with you. I want to thank you for making it possible for me to be able to do the work that we do in Washington, D.C. It is really a pleasure for me to be able to sit here, to laugh with you and to be with you, but to sit down and to be able to actually help write and edit the resolutions. Then I know when I go back to D.C., as I sit here and I send things to my staff constantly about what you need, I really heard the real voice from Indian country. I heard the heartbeat of my people. Guneshish.